Hello everyone and welcome back to Adventures Elsewhere Review, the spoiler-free book review show. I am your host Jade Black, and today I'm here with quite an unusual pick. This wasn't a book I was sent to review, this is a book I was actually asked to blurb, but I enjoyed reading it so much that I thought I'd make an episode on this. So this is The Dreamwalker by Alethea Lyons. This is adult urban fantasy. It's indie press, it's Bridget's Gate, and I read the ebook. I realised that my reading software is a bit weird with page count. So whatever page count I give for ebooks is not particularly accurate. I think it's round about 150. Not sure. Disclaimer on this one, The Dreamwalker is the third book in the Seer of York series, and I've come to that cold. With the author's approval, the author said it was fine to do that, and there's a little previously on page or two, so I didn't feel any issues going into book 3 cold, to be honest, and I think even without the previously on, it would have been fine. So this book, in 3 words, I like to do a little 3-word summary of the book. I would say it's cozy, magical, and fun. I've seen this book listed as dark fantasy. I, for one, don't understand that. Maybe I just don't understand the dark fantasy label, but it does have its dark moments, sure, but this, to me, was a very cozy read. Maybe I just read too much horror for this. So there are a lot of characters in this book. It's a big ensemble cast and you got quite a few side characters as well. I'm not going to talk about everyone because this episode would be 10 years long and I'm not editing all that. Let's start with Harper, our main POV character. She is an archivist and she's quite fun. She has music magic, which is awesome, more on that later, but she's just like a really solid, strong, confident, but also quite nervous, at times underconfident, quite vulnerable almost, main character. She is just very, very real. There are points at which I maybe felt she acted a bit young for her age, but she is also very emotional, so maybe I'm just being hard on her. Harper has a sister called Grace. Grace doesn't get as much page time, but she's a good character. She has a lot of similarities to Harper, but she's much more confident. She's extremely sure of herself to a fault. But she's this very strong, very confident, quite skeptical sort of person. She's a very good sister to Harper. Their relationship is very fun. It's wholesome, and it's quite nice to see wholesome family relationships, and it's a bit found family, but also a bit not. And I don't know, it's nice to see wholesome female relationships, wholesome female family relationships. It doesn't seem like it's something that you get very much of, at least. It's not really in fantasy, at least in my experience, so that's quite nice. I think my favourite character of the sort of main bunch, though, is Fionn. Fionn is a shifter, he's a cat shifter. He can come across as a bit of an anxious soft boy, and in many ways he is, but he's also just extremely traumatised and used, and not treated well by people, and he's very clearly been groomed, and it's kind of heartbreaking, because it's not just sort of anxious soft boy because popular archetype or whatnot. Like, he has a legitimate reason, several, in fact, to be the way he is, not least because he's a shifter in a culture that just won't accept that. It's difficult, and there's maybe a sort of underlying theme of some neurodiversity in there. I mean, it comes up in, I think, a few characters, but Fionn, maybe it's there, maybe it's cultural difference, but I did feel that there was maybe something there. Could be wrong, I'm not neurodiverse and trying to say, is it this? Like I have any idea what I'm talking about. Extending from Fionn, we have Fionn's master as well, who is one of the antagonists and an absolute piece of shit. Very interesting character, very scheming, very sort of almost classic antagonist in a fantasy book type thing, but they're very interesting. I'm not quite sure whether he is an antagonist, strictly. Again, maybe this is a coming to book 3 cold thing, but I'm not complaining if it makes some more mystery. Again, mystery is a big thing in this book, one of the sort of core things in this book, and it's fun to see that not just in the main quest, but with someone like Fionn and his master too, and exactly what they're up to. Big fan of that. Deo is the other side character I wanted to point out. I think Deo is like bound to be fan favourite. Deo is awesome. Yeah, Deo is this really fun, again, that's a very complicated character. Like, there's a lot of artistry in there, and there's going to be a whole big section on that, believe me, for this book. But he's very sweet, he's very sort of nice, but he's got a backbone. Quite a substantial one at that, and looks like maybe some anger issues as well, but not in a sort of... he's a troubled man, troubled artist, I guess. But a sweetheart and gentle deep down. He doesn't let a lot of people see that side of him, but it gets brought out of him at points, and it's very wholesome. So let's talk about the writing quality of this book, because this is something that in the urban fantasy I've read generally has been lacking. Absolutely not the case here. This book is beautifully written, like absolutely beautifully written, especially all of the sequences, and there are a lot of them, relating to art and music and dreams. It's so evocative. The author really cares about these things and has really put time into making these things evocative, making these things emotional. What's really interesting is how different people are seen looking at the same pieces of art and how different that experience is. That's such a nice touch that's in there, how different people experience art differently, and how dreams are experienced and talked about. It feels otherworldly, magical. You know, there is magic, so there's magic, there's otherworldliness, there's this dreamlike energy, it's just beautifully done. It really, really is. It's one of those things where if you're ever looking to write dreams, especially in a setting where there's magic, where I can imagine that's incredibly hard to balance, by the way, beautifully done here. Read this if you want to see how it's done. You know, art, music, and dreams, these are all things that strike a chord with me, pun actually not intended, on that one. So seeing it written so well, so beautifully, with such respect, that was something that I really liked. You know what else was really good in this? Was the pacing. I was worried that this book would be... This is another thing I've often seen with, honestly, most fantasy, that the pacing just doesn't quite work. Super solid pacing, nicely done, flows nicely, ebbs and flows nicely. That said, there are a couple of moments that I felt went a little too quickly, and were skipped over maybe a little bit more than I would have liked. But, you know, I'm kind of picking up faults here. Like, it's not that big a deal, and it's a bit of a personal preference thing as well. This book is reasonably long, so I would rather, to be honest, have that and fill in the gaps a little bit as a reader, especially in a book that's so evocative and emotional, and you sort of end up doing that in a little bit anyway. It's not out of place to do that. It would be much worse if it was, let's spend way too long on this. I'd have a much bigger problem with that. Especially in a book that's as pacey as this. It's fairly minor. There was one that I did feel was genuinely a bit of a shame that was treated like this, but again, it's personal preference, really. So world building and lore on this one, it's a contemporary setting, it's set by and large in York and the Humber. So, there's not a ton of physical world building there. I mean, it's a fun, very pretty setting. If you've ever been to York, then you know that York is a very beautiful setting. A lot of the sort of lore and sort of how the magic works is kind of loose, but not too loose. I'll talk about this more later. But there's one part of the sort of lore and mystery that's just really cool, and that's the idea of curses and how the curses are done. They're really cool, genuinely. It's just really fun to see, it's quite inventive. So yeah, that was just a fun little lore point. So themes, I didn't pick up on too many in this book. I think there are probably more than I picked up on. The main ones I noticed were the sort of interaction between possession and mind control. There's quite a lot of that, and that was fun. Actually, I like that. It's not something that I tend to like because it tends to be handled quite clumsily and quite unbelievably, actually. I often find that something like this can lead to character inconsistency. That's not really done here, and is there a sort of, well, the characters who are being controlled aren't characters you're necessarily familiar with, so is there maybe just a bit of a bullet dodge conceptually on that? Yes and no, at points. I think the way it's done is clever, and I think it's fun. It's not hidden on the page, it's something that the characters know is happening. It's not trying to be something that it isn't, and I really value that. And I just like how it's executed. I don't want to get into that because it is spoilers, but how it's executed is just fun, actually. There is also, and I did sort of allude to this earlier, the idea that magic and magical folk are secretive and it all has to be sort of under wraps, and, there's tensions between the guard and the churches on how to deal with that, which is interesting in its own right, to be honest. There's not that much time spent on it. I mean, there's enough to sort of go, okay, you guys again. But the idea of the sort of secretive magic and magical folk is quite interesting. It's something that's done quite a lot, but I think it's something that's done nicely here, and how Theon in particular brings this up, brings it to the surface, how he deals with it and the sorts of things he does. I like that. I like how it's handled surrounding Theon and around Harper's origins, and it's interesting to see the contrast and how different people think about these things, and how, again, everyone sort of thinks they're doing the right thing, but are they? Is there, realistically, is there a tight, good solution that's not going to result in someone getting hurt? It's a more inclusive version of the real world that Lyons has built, but there are still lines. Another sort of fun little theme is first loves. That's quite a fun little theme sometimes. I think especially when you have characters who are a bit older experiencing that, because nothing bores me like a high school romance, other than a high school fantasy. Really, I mean, usually they go hand in hand, but nothing really bores me more than that. Like, it's just dumb kids being dumb about love. That doesn't interest me in the slightest. When you get someone who's a bit older, sort of dealing with love and attraction for the first time and how that can come across, and it's sort of, the innocence of that can be quite endearing. And maybe it's innocent, maybe it's not, and maybe it's not the first love for the other person, and how that all interacts. That's fun, that's done nicely, especially with a particular pair of characters. The whole idea of politics and control, it's me. I'm gonna love this. And in a story like this, I think it's fun, with all the sort of secret magic and a whole big mystery thread, and how politics is just bound to come up, but it also exists in other spheres, and how all of that tension is linked and builds together, and is just a pain. And again, there aren't clean solutions to these things. And this is where you get a lot of the interesting stuff between Fionn and his master, and how Fionn sort of bounces viewpoints a little bit at points because of his own experiences as much as anything. And, he sees Harper and Grace and their lot saying one thing, and maybe even experiencing that one thing, and the Master says something quite different that also seems to come from their experience. So there's somewhat of a rock and hard place. Actually, both of you kind of seem to be right. Maybe over here you're too idealistic and you're too pessimistic. And Fionn, as the sort of the magical being that can pass for a normal cat and a normal human, and also be something in between. That whole interaction, I really like. That's one of the most fun things about the book to me, is that sort of... It's not intentional on behalf of Harper and Grace, and it's not intended to be malicious. It's intended to be something of hope and something of you're freer than you think. But there's a bit of almost telling Fionn how to feel. And it's like, no, it's okay. No, it is, when it's not, actually. And sometimes Fionn is right to be concerned and not do things. And Harper and Grace don't always necessarily see that being in a different situation to him. And I think that's really good to have on the page. The other obvious thread around all the politics is the fate of York. I mean, it's quite a high-stakes book, and how different characters see that and how different characters want to approach that. That's quite interesting. There's not much I can say about that without spoilers. How all of that works, and again, is there is potential for a cleaner solution, but is it actually realistic to be able to do that? Do we have time? And, can we solve the mystery fast enough to do that? I think is an interesting way of having tension there. That felt quite unique. I guess I've already touched on sort of vibes and tone a bit here, saying it is high stakes, but it's also got that cozy vibe to it. There's an interesting balancing act there. It's quite a fun interaction. You don't usually get both of those things in the same story, so seeing that's awesome, actually. What's also kind of fun about this book is it's a contemporary setting, it's very modern feel. That is just how it comes across. It's a very modern magic. The other thing I would say about this book is it's very compassionate to all of its characters, really, in their own way. That's something that's quite interesting, again, in something that's high stakes, but also has that cozy vibe. I mean, maybe that's just part of that it's written with a lot of compassion and with a lot of genuine care for the characters, the people, the places. I don't know, that was just something that struck me, was there's a real core of compassion in this book, and that's just not something I feel like I've come across before. So the magic system is really fun here. There are a lot of different kinds of magic. I feel like it's one of those books, maybe series, where you just don't really see all of it. It's quite a loose magic system. You start to see that more at the climax. And I actually think it works here. I think it's pretty fun how it's handled. It's not loose to the point of the real classic Wolverine thing of just, oh no, he's in too dangerous of a situation and we don't know how to handle this. He can heal himself now. It's none of that sort of level of nonsense. There's a looseness, but it ties into the sort of mystery of not really knowing what everyone's capable of, or necessarily exactly how magic works and why it works, because at points it is open to the magical archivist person, I don't really understand this, which is kind of fun in its own right. So there's a bit of looseness around that. It isn't out of place. It gets a point where it's a bit too fantasy for me, and I don't love it at every point, but I mean, it's me and fantasy books, so what are you expecting, frankly? Especially one that's magic heavy. The music magic is awesome. I really, really love this. This is what Harper does. She has whole collection of violins, which is just, it's fun, and it's also a little bit humorous for those of us who have a few too many instruments. And the way that the music magic works, that ties into nature. Again, this is just something that's written with a lot of care, and it's something that's written with a lot of passion, and I just love to see that. Music is something that's really hard to write, and it's done really well, and it's really fun, and that ties into magic. It's kind of the cherry on top in a book like this. I like Fionn and Fionn's magic. Fionn has some of the loosest magic we see. Fionn is kind of a loose being, in the sense that he's a shifter. One state, the other, or somewhere in the middle. So the idea that his magic is sort of loose and a bit loose cannon as well, I actually think is fun. Especially given that he has limits on it through all sorts of different things, actually. I actually think how that's handled, given the sort of character he is, I think that's fun, and I like how that's done. Let's talk about some favourite moments of the book. Spoiler free, of course, as these episodes always are. There is a character pairing I very much like, and that is Fionn and Deo together. Like, as soon as those two are in a room together, I was like, I am for this. Like, these two together is just so much fun. They're both very sweet and all of that. Fionn much more on the surface than Deo is, but the whole interaction between strong backbone but sweet Deo and traumatized little Fionn. Although Fionn isn't that little actually, but I don't know. That pairing of characters is just, I don't know, it's just a winner. It really is. These two are really fun together, and they have a lot of really nice, really genuine interactions that they don't get with other characters, despite maybe being closer to those characters, being more familiar. It's just the nature of human relationships, that every relationship you have with every person is unique. And I feel like when those two are on page together, you really see it. Like, it's a thing in this book anyway, but these two really bring that to the fore in their own way. I really like it. I mentioned it earlier, but just about everything to do with dreams in this book I just absolutely love. It's so well written every single time. It's written differently a lot of different times, and that's fun in its own right. Again, props to the writer, some serious skill on display here. But all of that is just fun. It's magical as it needs to be, it's artistic when it needs to be, it's dreamlike and ethereal when it needs to be. There's so much being juggled and balanced in those, and done effortlessly. It's impressive. Harper's memories as well. Harper does have a bit of the amnesiac MC thing going on, but it's done nicely here. And the idea of regaining her memories and how that happens, and the sort of inconsistencies of that, feels very natural. And what she does with those memories, how that affects her, how that makes her feel, and at points how that is and isn't plot relevant and character relevant, and I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that's done with that that's very emotional. Again, this is a real core of compassion part of the book. I really liked that. I wasn't expecting to like that. As soon as I sort of saw this coming up, I thought, I'm either going to love this or I'm going to despise it, and it's usually the latter with plot lines like this. Not this time. Not much I can say about that without spoilers, which is a bit of a travesty because they are genuinely some of my favourite scenes in the book, but this being a very artistic, dreamy, musical book, there are a lot of moments that to me are quite inspiring artistically. One of which I may or may not have taken on, that you may or may not have seen on socials by the time this episode comes out. A lot of the stuff to do with dreams, and especially how that works with Fionn, is really, really fun. I really like how that's done, and all of that was just so visual and so visceral. Kind of seems like the wrong word, I guess evocative is the one I'm looking for. But there's so much there that just, it kind of leaps off the page and onto the canvas on its own. The Fionn Deo moments, their interactions, the way that those two see the world, and the way that those two describe things and experience things, again, it just naturally lends to this. And when those interactions are so detailed and so fun and so pretty anyway, again, it's just sort of bound to get into that sort of space. There are a few scenes that take place in libraries and bookshops and places like that as well. The way that those are described and the sorts of settings that they're in is really quite fun, and that's something that would be fun to play with. It's very charming, it's very evocative in its own right, and it would be something that's quite fun to play with. So rating for this book is more difficult than you might think, from how I've talked about it. There's so much of this book that I genuinely absolutely adore, but it is too fantasy for me. It is. And I've mentioned a couple of places where that is, the climax is kind of a bit of a bummer to be too fantasy. Like, it was bound to happen, sure, and I knew it. But when the climax doesn't quite land, that sucks. It's not the only part that's a bit too fantasy for me. It's not a hard threshold to reach. It really isn't. This is strictly a personal preference thing. It's not in any way, shape, or form a problem with the book. This is me having opinions about things. I'll be disingenuous to give this a 5-star rating. It's too fantasy for me. There are things that I don't love about it. Beyond that as well, to be honest. But giving it a 4-star rating is insanely harsh for how good this book is. I don't like breaking the rating system on this show, but sometimes you gotta. This one is a 4.5 out of 5. It's one of hopefully very few books that break the rating system, but it is what it is. Giving it a 5 would be disingenuous, giving it a 4 would be criminal. What else are you gonna do? So that brings us about to the end of the episode. If you are a writer and you would like to send an ARC to me, there is a cheat sheet at the end of the video for sort of basic guidelines of what I am and am not interested in. I'm quite picky, just to warn you. There is a full time-stamped video as well with further information and everything about that. Links to that in the description. There's also a link to the Google form to submit in the description as well. General principle, if in doubt, send it. What's the worst thing that can happen? I politely say, actually I just don't think I'm the right champion for this book. Is about all for today. So you have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy reading.